السلام عليكم أيها السيدات والسادة. Shalom, حافرين وحافرات. Peace be upon you, ladies and gentlemen. أهلا وسهلا. Welcome all to the 13th Annual International Conference on Central and Southwest Asia. My name is Samir Bitar, and today I will serve as chair and moderator for this awesome panel. We have a two-part panel. We will have a presentation by my dear colleague, Professor Ardeshir Kia, and then we have the second part, which will be a presentation by our students, whom we are very proud of. Before we start, I'd like to offer the following thank yous. I would like to thank the Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center, the Montana World Affairs Council, the UN Department of History, the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures, the Russian Studies Department, the President's Office, and the Office of the Provost at the University of Montana, as well as the Rocky Mountain Ballet Theater for sponsoring and organizing this conference. Special thanks goes to the members of the Great Missoula community, as well as the faculty, students, and staff at the University of Montana who have supported the organizers of this conference with their deep commitment to bringing discussion of important and critical international issues to this campus and our beloved community. This morning it's my honor and privilege to introduce my friend, colleague, refuge, and the list goes on, Professor Ardeshir Kia, who is a pillar of education here at the University of Montana. He received his PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1988. His area of specialization are cultures, civilizations, architecture, artistic traditions, urban planning, social organizations, and environments of Central and Southwest Asia. He is very accomplished, has taught students in the thousands, if I may say. So far, his tally, 141 courses. He has organized and participated in more than 40 conferences, locally, nationally, and internationally. His research and scholarship area and creative activity is in publications. He has 3 textbooks and many journal entries. With no further ado, please help me welcome Professor Ardeshir Kia.
Thank you so much for those kind words. And thank you for coming to the 13th Conference on Central Southwest Asia. I'm going to talk, I'm going to time myself, so that was our agreement, so I don't go, I'm going to talk about 30, 35 minutes, and then we have enough time for a couple other presentations by a couple young scholars that we are, as Professor Bitar said, very kindly, we are very proud of them. And primarily the topic is the golden ages of Central Asia. And what I'm going to be doing is that primarily I'm going to walk, taking the microphone off, since I really, usually people who have been in my classes, I fall asleep if I sit down, and I get really numb when I stand up, so I have to move around. So you will notice that. The question is that, well, when we talk about Central Asian golden ages, primarily we are talking about maybe 7 different golden ages that we are dealing with. I'm going to be talking about. Briefly, I'm going to actually talk about them. Then we're going to get into details of them. But then after 30 minutes, close to 35 minutes, I'm going to stop. And then if we have extra time, we can elaborate more on some of these stages, stepping stone that Central Asia goes through. As you notice, this is Astana, the new capital of Kazakhstan, that primarily because of petrodollar boom, we are looking at fascinating development within the new center of Central Asia. This is after 1991. We are looking at Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan, that Turkmenistan being a periphery of Soviet Union, one of the 15 states of Soviet Union. And primarily when we are talking about Ashgabat, this is 11 to 12 years old, what we are looking at. We are talking about Turkmenistan emerging as the fourth largest exporter of natural gas in the world. This is independence celebration in Ashgabat we are looking at. And the question is that whether, when we are looking at these pictures, can we regard this as a golden age? Something that has started 11, 12 years ago. We are talking about independence. We are talking about multi-billion-dollar contracts as far as petrodollar boom. We are talking about natural gas boom, that we are talking about multi-billion-dollar contracts with almost every single petroleum and natural gas company in the world. But then before we come to any type of conclusion, I put it as a question, but then yet we're going to go back into time and talk about few of stepping stone that the history of the area, when we are talking about Central Asia, has gone through. And primarily, I'm going to just somehow briefly, I'm going to list them, and then we're going to go through them, elaborate them one after the other, see how far we go. One important aspect of this golden ages comes when Peter the Great, the Tsar of Russia in 1715, primarily starts a campaign, a military campaign, moving towards Central Asia. And primarily shortly after the campaign starts, after a few months, his commanders actually come back from where is today northwest of Kazakhstan with 5 pieces of gold that they put in front of his table, his desk. And Peter asked, well, wow, what are these? These look very old. Where do you get them? And excuse me. They said that, well, we bought them from the markets, from your people. He said, markets, my people? He said, yeah, the Russians are breaking in to Mons, into kurgans, as Russians call it, and then they take the treasury of these kurgan Mons, they take it to the center of town, the market, and sell them. And Peter, being surprised by that, says that, well, why don't you go and buy whatever is available in the market, whatever is worth it, and bring it to me, and then put up signs, put up ads, and let the people know that that is totally unacceptable, in a sense that we are not breaking in any tombs. It should somehow be excavated scientifically and systematically by archaeologists and scholars. Eventually, to make that particular stepping stone of time, Peter is also building a palace in St. Petersburg, that next to the palace we are observing the building of Hermitage Museum, that when we are talking about today, Hermitage Museum has over 20,000 gold pieces from those Mons that had been excavated by Russian and Soviet scholars, that primarily most of them come from 7th century BC to 4th century BC. Is that a golden age when we are talking about 20,000 different pieces of gold that was somehow gathered by Russians, Soviets? Now, talking about some of the scholarly work that have been done within the area as far as somehow rewriting, reconstructing the history of the area. I thought to bring to your attention few of the highly committed, dedicated people, Arthur Pope and Phyllis Ackerman, that primarily Arthur Pope died in 1968, Phyllis Ackerman died in 1974. But then when we are talking about some of the pioneers, the scholars who have done extensive work within the area as far as reconstructing, rewriting the history, we have to talk number of these people, especially when we talk about the next stepping stone of history that primarily comes when some of the Central Asian states known as satraps were created in the 6th century BC, 5th century BC, during a Achaemenid period of Achaemenid Empire period. And primarily when we are talking about some of the states of Central Asia, we're going to be looking at a few maps. When we talk about Khwarezmia, Sogdia, Margiana, Parthia, Bactria, these are some of the states of Central Asia, ancient Central Asia, that till the Russian occupation actually, and it's still by the locals, they are referred, these regions are referred by the name that somehow we just were listing them. So when we are talking about rewriting the history, constructing the history, we are talking about the states were established, the capital of states were established, the roads were made. So this is like pre-Silk Road era and time, and people were wondering that, wow, how did Silk Road expanded so fast from 3rd century BC? Well, prior to that, this area, when we are talking about Central Asia, was connected through these roads, and we are talking about the establishment of a state that besides bureaucracy, we are talking about capitals, we are talking about interaction and communication amongst these capitals to the west of China. The next another scholar we have to talk about is Richard Fry, who just died not less than a couple of years ago. And primarily, this is one of the books, his books that we have used for a few of those courses that Professor Vitar was talking about, the heritage of Central Asia. When we are talking about ancient times, ancient period, another era time that we have to talk about primarily is the Parthian period. Parthian period, primarily, we're talking about 480 years that from south east of Caspian Sea, Parthia, one of the states of Achaemenid Empire, expand into a large empire, and for 480 years rules large part of Central Asia, Near East, Middle East, primarily the states that we just named. And this is the time that actually the Chinese envoy, at the time of Emperor Han Wudi, when we are talking about the 2nd century BC, comes to the capital of Parthians, Nisa, N-I-S-A. And the first intercontinental trade and commerce contract was signed, excuse me, in Nisa. So when we are talking about the prosperity, the golden age of Parthian Empire and Central Asia within this time, the excavation that shows the fact that when we are talking about the climax of Parthian Empire within Nisa, the envoy, Chinese envoy actually starts its trip in 138 BC, but by the time that the contract is signed, actually is 104 BC, and when we are talking about that golden age, that prosperity as a result of trade and commerce that not only comes through Central Asia, but also Kushanid, North Indian Empire, and Romans also are included in. That is another stepping stone of history that we're going to be talking about it. Then also we have to talk about another kingdom empire that primarily, when we are talking about Kushanid Empire from 30 AD to 320 AD, for almost 300 years. North India, southern part of Central Asia was ruled by them. Primarily, we are talking about when within that almost 300 years, Kushanid the Kushanid also were included in this type of collaboration and trade and commerce that we are dealing with. And when we are talking about prosperity of North Indian cities, South Central Asian towns primarily, is because of expansion of trade and commerce and all these interactions that we are talking about. Then a couple years ago, actually, golden age of Central Asia, lost enlightenment by Professor Frederick Starr from Johns Hopkins University, Professor Richard Schroy from Harvard University. Came out that a couple of years ago when we went to Washington, actually, I went and congratulated him by putting the book together as a fascinating collection of documents that shows the fact that when we are talking about the next stage, next Central Asian golden age, primarily it comes like, so far we were talking about pre-Islamic period. This is when Islam comes to the area, and primarily when Samanid dynasty from Bukhara, one of the major cities of Central Asia, somehow establishes themselves first as a city-state, then as a kingdom, then expand to an empire. And primarily Bukhara became, B-O-K-H-A-R-A, became the center, capital of cultural activities, intellectual activities. And when we look at Bukhara primarily, when Russians actually occupied Bukhara after so many years, that somehow has deteriorated and somehow shrank down to a little bit over 100,000 people. They write, like this is second half of 19th century. It's amazing that this city, a little bit over 100,000, has 103 schools. 103 schools for 100,000 people. Whatever is the leftover of that 9th, 10th century golden age of Bukhara or Samanid, that shows the fact that education was the backbone of this golden age. It was not only education, it was the safe haven that they provided for the intellectuals of not only Central Asia, but all surrounding area, that everybody came to Bukhara to somehow have a higher education, better education. We are talking about libraries besides the school. We are talking about books, that thousands of books was written by so many different scholars within this time. We are talking about a patronage system, the understanding and the support and appreciation of the leadership within this time that somehow attracts more and more people to this area. Then the next golden age we are talking about is Timurid, that Timur being an Uzbek and invading and massacring large number of people. When he comes to Central Asia and he decided to build Samarkand as his capital, he realizes that all this prosperity that he learns about Central Asia is based on education, based on that institutions that somehow promoted, elevated people to a higher being, to a higher quality and substance-oriented type of people. So in that sense, the very first, after devastating Samarkand, we are talking about 14th, 15th century, the very first urbanized architectural entities in a place called Registan, that is like a place that is covered with pebbles. The very first construction are 3 schools, 3 very large schools that he builds, and then somehow bringing scholars to practice, to teach within those schools, and then expanding education within that area. So let's go through some of the slides that when we are talking about primarily, now going back into time, and see how we're doing time-wise. So when we are talking about, let's go back to prehistoric time in the sense that when we are talking about these gold pieces that somehow was found by Russians and archaeologists and somehow were taken to St. Petersburg and somehow collected within that area that when we are talking about, this is called steppe. And a steppe in Russians meaning grassland that is so cold that trees don't grow. So we are talking about eastern steppe, we are talking about western steppe, we are talking about from Manchuria all the way to the heart of Europe. And primarily this is the place that when we are talking about 7th to 4th century that all these primary gold pieces were collected, found, and taken to St. Petersburg. We are talking about a decentralized type of entity that so many different small kingdoms ruled, a king and a queen surrounded by warriors. And then we are talking about horse cultures, we are talking about sheep cultures as the dominating cultures within this particular area. Now, Russians, when they came to this area, when they occupied we are talking about Kazakhstan in the first half of 19th century, and when we're talking about Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, that's the area, second half of 19th century. They had no idea who these people were that they live within this area. Where is the starting point here? Now, through all this time, they found out this, what you see had Altai Mountains, that is north-south type of like mountains here. Primarily, they found a starting point. In fact, within Altai Mountains, there were a number of Russian scholars who actually did their research within the area. And the most famous of these kurgans was in a place called Pazyryk, P-A-Z-Y-R-I-K. And there are 40-some kurgans within that area. They found thousands of artifacts, gold pieces, pottery pieces, fabric pieces from this area. And for a long period of time, they thought that, well, that is it, till after the fall of Soviet Union, a couple of years after the fall, the Russian scholars actually went to this area, and they took one of the rivers that actually floats, the Ob River actually, and they went to a higher altitude place that is called Minosinsk, M-I-N-U-S-I-N-K, and primarily they found thousands of these funerary sites within Minosinsk. We are talking about all different type of funerary sites. Now, since then, since like when we are talking about maybe 1993, they definitely think that primarily Minosinsk should be the beginning of all this, like the population explosion and then the float of the nomadic people to the east, and west of this area. So as far as place, we are talking about when we are looking at the steppe or the grasslands, grazing lands of Central Asia, a vast plain which stretches from the lowlands of Central Europe eastward to the borders of China, constituted the undisputed homeland of a considerable number of nomadic tribes. As far as time, we are talking about from the first millennium BC to the end of the first millennium AD. These nomads were able to affect events occurring in the ancient world to a quite surprising degree. Now this is the eastern part of Kazakhstan when we are talking about grasslands that no tree grows. Unlike the biases that media has over many other, some of the media, of course, that they like to portray everyone like desert or something. We are talking about horse culture. We are talking about huge number of horses that have been raised through history within this time. Fascinating pieces, fascinating horses, and also sheep culture that comes from this area. When we are talking about kurgans, primarily this is what you see in the background is Lake Issyk-Kul, that is to the north of Kyrgyzstan. Across the lake is Kazakhstan. So we are talking about eastern Kazakhstan, north of Kyrgyzstan. That around the lake, we find these mounds that when we are talking about this particular area, seems like was a sacred ground that so many of these, when we are talking about kings or queens of the number of different nomadic group people in the history, we know them as Scythians, Sakas, Sarmatians, Huns. These are some of the nomadic people that lived within this area. Primarily, all of them believed in life after death. When people believed in some sort of shamanism, that cult or religion, that they thought that people literally did not die. They took a journey, a trip. And when they were buried, especially when we are talking about like members of royalty, they were buried with their personal belongings, with their treasury. And as a result, when we find all these gold pieces, although every single kurgan that they have found has been broken in by grave robbers in ancient times or medieval time, but then because that usually they were looking for precious stone, gold pieces, or jewelry pieces primarily, so much of it was not disturbed or not excavated. So when they go back and they look at, they somehow search through, they find additional pieces within. So when they divide, when they break down whatever they through these excavation, they found indigenous. Now, Altai was a popular spot that we were looking at, the map where it was that the concentration of the very first Russians and Soviet scholars was pretty high in that area. Then Saka to the east, Sarmatian to the west, Scythians to the west of this area, primarily some of these indigenous population tribes that they have been identified. But many of these artifacts, many of these gold pieces are in kind of like an animal style type of art that was practiced by various groups of nomads who were often related, yet always distinct. We talked about Peter the Great, primarily 1682, 1725, and Russian colonial expansion. Primarily, we are talking about the military expansion starting 1715, and we are talking about Romanov family, and that primarily this expansion initiated by the elders of the family in a sense that they were offering actually protection to some of these ethnicity nationalities. They're still wanting protection from who or what, but yet that is how they somehow expanded their interaction, communication, and also evaluation that how the infrastructure of these regions are, the armed forces, the defense mechanism of some of these cities and towns are for further expansion into the area. And then we talked about Hermitage Museum that primarily all these artifacts actually went to and stayed in. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. So we are talking about St. Petersburg, that actually Peter built it as his capital, and then next to his palace, Hermitage Museum, that the second floor of Hermitage, every few feet, there is someone with a machine gun watching the gold pieces. It's like Fort Knox of the former Soviet Union, now Russia. So these are one of the early pieces belong to Peter the Great collection that you see this was a kind of a belt bucket that it is kind of symmetrical type of gold pieces like horses, talking about horse cultures, and then a couple Scythians sitting underneath the horses. It seems like a belt went around this thing for formal ceremonial type of events. It was used, and this is one of the very first gifts that was given to Peter. Now, based on some of these foundings that primarily continued, and the Natural Geography magazine primarily had this as a cover when we are talking about the king and queens of the steppe, that in the mid-1960s, there was a prince or princess. Now, there are debates whether he or she was a prince or princess, maybe 17 years old, was found with 4,000 pieces of gold woven together as the uniform or outfit of this person, with number of jewelry pieces that suggest the fact that we are talking about like horse culture, that some of these pieces that we are looking at was decoration for the crowns or hats or other pieces of fabric. Now, based on that, this was recreated as when we are talking about that each of these decentralized kingdoms was led by a king and queen within the area. Now, just an example of that, how scattered some of these archaeological excavations were. When people moved into the area, Professor Masson, M-A-S-S-O-N, was the head of archaeological and excavation activities within Central Asia, and he brought with 2,000 people, like some top archaeologists, but then many associates and then assistants and students to the area, and they were assigned to different fields. But then yet everybody wanted to work on a kurgan because they know that the Mond will yield some of these gold pieces, possibly, most probably. So they were flatlands, they were flat excavation sites that they were, not too many people showed that much interest to commit themselves to those excavation sites. Now here, the Soviet archaeologist Kuftin examined 42 of Bronze Age burials and found that they dated from about the middle of 2nd millennium BC. Some of these burials included bronze figurines, sophisticated style vessels of bronze, silver, and gold, the burial ground of Pazyryk that we talked about, Altai Mountain, Pazyryk, and Tukti, Shibi, and Katanda were excavated by a group of Soviet scholars, including Grazanov and Rodenko. Still wondering where the beginning of everything was. Again, back to Altai Mountain, and when we are talking about the new excavation, this is Minosinsk, that primarily we are talking about to the north of Altai Mountain, or where now we see it in a kind of a larger, actually enlarged type of like square that we see here, that primarily Pazyryk was one of the concentration of this excavation. And now they definitely think that Minosinsk was the place that primarily in some of the prehistoric ancient literatures, they have found that like when they talk about that the ancestors of these people came from a place that was 10 months of winter, they say, aha, that refers to Minosinsk, that primarily we are talking about southern Siberia and a place that with long winters. Minutes. Okay, thanks. So when we are talking about primarily shamanism of the area, shaman is a man or a woman capable of somehow interacting, communicating with supernatural forces. We are talking about the time of priest healer. We are talking about the spirit wood, that we are not talking about objects. Every single object within nature has a spirit, is a subject rather than an object. We are talking about the era and time of medicine, men and women. We are talking about belief in life after death, that primarily that was the notion, that was the contributing factor to the fact that many people actually, when they were buried with a number of different personal items, pottery pieces that included water, food, and then whatever necessity objects and popular type of items that they like to take in this journey or trip that they took. And then when we are talking about Mons, they were first graves, and then when we are talking about Mons or Kugans, primarily they became like family graves, that so many of them we find different members of the family and at times buried with their horses, with their dogs, with their cats in those kurgans. So like we are looking at a city in Osaka queen costume from 7th or 4th century that had been preserved in ice. Like when we are talking about some of these funerary sites being to the south of the Siberia, primarily, some of them were very nicely preserved in cold, like either air or ice, frozen in ice. And sorry about this. I don't know why it's repeating itself. And since 1965, they have found 3 more of actually of these gold men and women with their clothing. The gold man and woman with 4,000 pieces of gold that we are looking at primarily is right here. It was displayed in Almaty, the old capital of Kazakhstan. It has been a little bit over 10 years, 11, 12 years, that now this is the new museum in Astana, the new capital of Kazakhstan, that in the entrance of the museum you find 4 of these like ancestral figures that have been displayed. I think I'm going to stop right here since I had 2 minutes, and if by any chance we have time, we're going to continue, or I'll answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kia. Our next presenter will be one of our student scholars. Both our student scholars will address politics of leadership and spheres of influence in Central Asia, Afghanistan, and Iran. And I have asked them to kindly introduce themselves. So with no further ado, allow me to introduce James Papai, and he's going to give a very nice presentation.
It'll just be 1 second as we load it up. As Professor Bittar kindly indicated, I am James Papai, and today I'm going to be talking about power and leadership dynamics in modern Afghanistan. Cool. Luckily, I'm so short, I can stand right here and I don't block anybody's view. So as I said, power and leadership dynamics in modern Afghanistan. Just to give everybody an idea, this is Central Asia, Afghanistan right here. Some other places I'm going to be referencing are Iran, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan, because they all play a primarily ethnic role in development or lack thereof of the political culture of Afghanistan. This is a more specific map of Afghanistan. Just wanted to highlight some cities that are going to be important: Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, and this up here is the Panjshir region that I'm going to be talking about, especially as the Taliban comes into play. Just want to quickly highlight the topography of the country. It's not the really desert kind of climate that a lot of people think it is. It's very highly mountainous. It's also desertified. This is Bandi Amir National Park in the Central Highlands. This is the Registan Desert in the stretches between Kandahar and Helmand provinces, but that contrasts with the Hindu Kush. So it's a very, very diverse landscape, as well as it's also a diverse ethnic group. As you'll see, each of these different shapes and shades represents a unique ethno-linguistic group. And as you'll also notice, nowhere on this map does it say Afghan. And the reason why it doesn't say Afghan is because there's no such thing as an Afghan person. There's no sense of national identity like that. It's Pashtun people, it's Hazaras, it's Imaks, Baluchis, Tajiks, and Uzbeks. There is no, I'm an Afghan, it's, I'm a Pashtun. And what's also important, you can see from this map, is the ethnic groups are not contained within the state boundary, the political boundaries of the country. For instance, the Pashtuns stretch almost half of Pakistan, the Baluchis stretch into Pakistan, then there's the Turkmens, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, and as we'll see in a minute, this spread across boundaries has really impacted the potential, the security and the future of Afghanistan. Going back a little bit, the Kingdom of Afghanistan was founded in 1926. The first Emir king was Aminullah Khan. He ruled very briefly, and then he eventually would, from 1933 to 1973, would be Muhammad Zahir Shah. He would be the last king of Afghanistan. And while his reign was long, it was 40 years, it was, lots of peace. There was peace in the country. However, there was a lack of development. He was replaced through a bloodless coup by his cousin in 1973, Muhammad Dawood Khan. He was replaced in 1978 after the Saur Revolution by Nur Muhammad Taraki here on the left. This introduced the communist government into Afghanistan, which would rule from 1978 to 1992. As atheism was a tenet of the Soviet Union, so too was a tenet of the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. And this didn't really sit well with a lot of Afghan people. So this led to his overthrow by Hafizullah Amin, who tried to introduce some Islam back into the culture. And this led to popular unrest and was served as the justification for why in 1979 Operation Storm 333 happened, which was the Soviet intervention into Afghanistan to protect their communist brethren. During the time the Soviets were in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989, Babrak Karmal, right here, he led the country, as well as he was ultimately replaced by Mohammad Najibullah, who would be in power until 1992. From 89 to 92, the Soviet government was gone, but still continued with food supplements and gas supplements. As the Soviet Union fell, Boris Yeltsin cut them off, and as they lost their food supply, they lost the ability to maintain their government, which leads us to Mujahideen. When we talk about the Mujahideen, a lot of people get the idea that it was just a large umbrella concept, when in fact it's, as you can see from this map, each of these different colors represents a different Mujahideen group. So it wasn't the Mujahideen, it was rather several groups that were each had their own different agenda. During the 89 to 92 period, there was a civil war as the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan sought to maintain its authority, and the Soviets being gone, the Mujahideen groups now turned their attention on the government in Kabul. And some groups that were important came out of this period were Jamiat-e-Islami. It means Islamic Society. This man on the right is Burhanuddin Rabbani. He's going to be a very large figure in the next 20 years of Afghan development. It actually began as a political party in 1968. They were primarily ethnic Tajiks. This man on the left is Ahmad Shah Massoud. He created a subgroup called Shura-e-Nizar. He would be very, very important in future Afghan developments. This group is contrasted by Hezb-e Islami, was created in 1975. It means Islamic Party. This man is Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. He's going to play sort of the foil to this Afghan story. In 1979, it split as Muhammad Khalis split the group in half, and the remaining Hezbi Gulbuddin is now considered by the US government as a not full terrorist organization, but a group of concern. What's interesting also about Hezbi Islami is it's said that Hekmatyar spent more time fighting other mujahideen groups than he did fighting the Soviets. So that's sort of the first introduction of the fracturing that's happening in the political atmosphere of Afghanistan. This is Junbishi Mili. It's a ethnic Uzbek group. This man with the rather friendly-looking face is Abdul Rashid Dostum. He's going to play a key role in the next several decades. What is important about this, as you'll notice, where the other ones were created in the late 60s, the mid 70s, this is 1992. And the reason why it was 1992 is because the period from 79 to 89, this man fought with the Soviets and with the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan against the Mujahideen groups. But as the Soviets left and it looked like there was an opportunity to take power, he changed sides. And all of this came to a head in the fall of 1992, which saw the seizure of Kabul by these various groups. And each of these different colors represents a major Mujahideen group. This is Hekmatyar's Hezbi Islami. This is Dostum's Junbishi Mili. And this is Sharit-e-Nizar, which was Ahmad Shah Massoud. This is what Kabul looked like in 1992, following essentially 13 years of war. And after they seized power, they attempted to form a coalition government. This was the Peshawar Accord. It was signed in Peshawar, Pakistan. In 1992, it was a 12-point power-sharing plan which delegated authority to various groups, different aspects of the government. So like Hezbi Islami would be the Ministry of State, and Junbishi Mili would be the Ministry of War, and the Economic Department would be a different Mujahideen group. Unfortunately, Hekmatyar did not support the power-sharing coalition government, which brought this guy right here, Osama bin Laden, into the picture. He had been active in the Mujahideen, and we now think of him as radical, as a terrorist. But actually, in 1992, he was a voice of moderation, and he tried to convince Hekmatyar to join with the Peshawar Accord, join with his brothers, and create a state of Afghanistan that could address its issues and cohesively move into the future. Unfortunately, Hekmatyar didn't listen, and he attacked the presidential palace in 1992, rocketed Kabul again, and that began a 9-year series of civil wars. During that time, I thought it was easiest to just use a table to kind of talk about what's going on. There were 3 main factions. From 92 to 94, it was the Hezbi Islami and the officially recognized Islamic State of Afghanistan, which was led by Burhanuddin Rabbani, that first man I showed, as well as Ahmad Shah Massoud, Mohammad Mojahedi, and Abdul Rashid Dostum. And they fought against Hekmatyar, but as you'll notice, Dostum's in both categories. That's because in 1994, he sensed that the state was weak and time was right for him to ally with Hekmatyar, make a play for power. So he attempted to gain power. It only lasted about 6 months before he realized it wasn't going to work. So he flipped sides again. Excuse me. In 1994, the Taliban emerged, led by this. This is what we think Mullah Muhammad Omar looks like. Nobody really has an accurate picture. Right now, his bounty is $10 million if somebody can find him. They haven't seen him in 15 years. But he, in Maiwan district of Kandahar province, created the Taliban with 11 compatriots. In the fall of 94, they took Kandahar. In 95, they took Herat. And in September of 1996, they took Kabul. So it was a very, very fast rise. And that led to the creation of the United Islamic Front, or the Northern Alliance. And what's interesting about this is whereas everybody had been out for themselves in the previous 4 years, Now they had a cause to kind of unify together. And as you'll notice, not only are they different ethnic groups, but they're also different religious groups. So it's the Sunnis and the Shias, and it's the Pashtuns and the Uzbeks and the Tajiks, and it really created a cause for which everybody could unify against. Unfortunately, that didn't translate into successful action, as it really broke down to the territory of Abdul Rashid Dostum and the territory of Ahmad Shah Massoud, and then the rest controlled by the Taliban. And it continued this way until 1998, when the Taliban would seize Mazar-e-Sharif. They executed 11 Iranian diplomats. That started an Iranian-Taliban crisis. Dostum went into exile in Turkey, and that left this really easily defensible high alpine valley Panjshir region owned by Massoud as really the only outpost against the Taliban, or at least it was until September 9th, 2001. He had been going back and forth to the West, talking about the need for modernization, the need for moderation, the need for a transition to a government which saw the inclusion of women and a shift away from the fundamentalist Sharia Taliban. Ahmad Shah Massoud had been talking to the West and warned that there was an attack coming. But on September 9th, like I said, two gentlemen posing as media members had a bomb inside of a video camera and suicide bombed him. This is the mausoleum of Ahmad Shah Massoud in Panjshir. 2 days after his assassination, I think we pretty much know what this is. This led to the October 2001 invasion of Afghanistan. As you see, 90% of the country was controlled by the Taliban. There was this central area that was disputed, and this was what was left of the Northern Alliance post Massoud's death. Another interesting wrinkle is it also brought together, this is Dostum with American Special Forces, this is Hamid Karzai with American Special Forces, and the invasion offered an opportunity or a curse, depending on how you want to look at it, which saw reactionary leaders partner with the Americans and the other coalition forces in an attempt to push out the Taliban. However, at the same time, it also offered opportunities such as the Dashti Lili massacre, in which supporters of Dostum are purported to have executed between 300 and 3,000 Taliban prisoners. They shot, suffocated, or starved them in Connex containers like this in the top left. This is going to play, and at the end, it's going to be an interesting wrinkle. From 2001 to 2014, the country was led by Hamid Karzai. During that time, Transparency International ranked it as the second or third most corrupt state in the world, along with Somalia and North Korea, some countries you never really want to be associated with. He was able to develop the 2004 Constitution and create the Loya Jirga, which, depending on who you ask, is or is not an effective legislative body. In 2002, 4, 7, and 8, assassination attempts were made on his life. He created some friction with us, the Americans, through his Iranian relations, as he viewed them as friends and partners in peace, and we famously declared them as part of the axis of evil and didn't really want to have anything to do with them. The 2009 election is a black mark against his rule because of widespread allegations of electoral fraud and refusal to accept that he may not have actually won the election. He also created the Karzai 12, which I don't know if anybody in this audience has served in the military in Afghanistan, but the Karzai 12 were 12 points in which coalition forces needed to observe in how they interacted with the Afghan populace, engaged in ground combat, and utilized airstrikes, which they felt was excessively restrictive and didn't allow for the proper use of our military capabilities, depending on how you fall in that argument. Unfortunately, September 20th, 2011, Burhanuddin Rabbani, he was assassinated as well. So now that Jamiat-e-Islami, that entire leadership was gone, as Massoud was first assassinated and now Rabbani. And this was a loss of another highly respected moderate figure in Afghan politics. Into this picture at the same time comes Ashraf Ghani, and he's really interesting for his family legacies. Bahram Ghani, his great-grandfather, Abdul Ghani, his grandfather, and Hashmat Ghani, his brother. This is a map of Afghanistan and Pakistan, and right here is the Durand Line, which was created by the British in 1893, and Ashraf Ghani's great-grandfather scouted for the British, carried supplies for the British, and aided the British during the Second Anglo-Afghan War. And when they created the Durand Line, they split the Pashtuns in half and created Afghanistan as a buffer state between the Russian, Central Asia, and British India. And so this would play as a legacy of Western collaboration, as well as his grandfather. Showed the first Amanullah Khan as the first king. He was eventually overthrown by Habibullah Kalakani, seen here on the left. And the British weren't supportive of this coup. So Ashraf Ghani's grandfather aided the British in the installation of Muhammad Nadir Shah, seen here on the right. And that brings us to his brother, who is the chairman of the Grand Council of the Kuchis. The Kuchis are seen here. Excuse me. And the Kuchis are a Pashtun nomadic people who are primarily pastoralists. They herd sheep and small livestock from the northeast part of the country down in a crescent shape over to Herat. And what's interesting about them is because of their pastoral nomadic lifestyle, they are critically threatened people, according to the United Nations. When the Taliban rose, they formed the backbone of the cadre of the Taliban. So they formed all the leadership roles because they saw it as a way to elevate themselves out of their historical poverty. Once the Taliban was removed, then it left a vacuum in how do we compensate for this lost income, this lost prestige, and this lost power, and that translated to narco-trafficking. So the shipment of opium, the shipment of hashish across the country, and the partnering with frequently violent drug traffickers have led to a situation in which there are tens of thousands of Kuchi people on UN refugee camps, which we don't really talk about refugee camps in Afghanistan, but there are. And so there are Kuchis who are in these refugee camps. There are also Kuchis who are looking for a return of the Taliban, and there are Kuchis who are trafficking drugs. All create a situation in which they are simultaneously poised to return, yet critically threatened at the same time. And all of this for Ashraf Ghani means that, like we'll see with Carson's presentation, there is a legacy of Western collaboration which leaves open the potential for future uprising of the people who decide that they're no longer interested in supporting governments who have allied themselves with Western powers. But more immediately, that brings us to this. And this man right here, Ashraf Ghani, this man right here, Abdul Rashid Dostum, you'd be wondering, well, why are they in a picture together? It's because Ghani is now the president of Afghanistan, and Dostum is his vice president. So the country is now led by the man whose family has historically collaborated with the British and is assisted by the man who has switched sides at least 4 different times, as well as allegedly perpetrated a massacre in which 3,000 people died. So that creates a situation in which, where is the loyalty? And the answer is not to the government. The loyalty is instead to their tribes, to their sub-tribes, to local warlords and power brokers. And the easiest example I have for this is, excuse me, this is the Baggy Pole Bridge. This crosses the Arghandab River just west of Kandahar. It forms the gateway to the city of Kandahar. And this is the monthly market. Everybody comes out and sells their stuff. But what's important about this is only a 400-meter long bridge, so it's not very long. But on this side are the Poppleseye. And what the Poppleseye do are they tax truck drivers coming in and out of Kandahar. And on this side of the bridge are the Alakazai. And they also tax truck drivers coming in and out of Kandahar. But what they do is they tax truck drivers who are from the other tribe. And what's interesting is both the Pabalzai and the Alakazai are Pashtuns. So when they speak of a greater tribal loyalty, that's really not the case, as these two sub-tribes are actively trying to embezzle or receive bribes or steal specifically from the opposing sub-tribes. So there is even a lack of loyalty within that tribe. And it's gotten to the point, excuse me, where there's been gunfire exchanged across this bridge as one side attempts to coerce money from groups from another tribe, and the people on this side don't respond favorably to that. And I should add that the people who are doing this embezzling are the Afghan National Police. So there's not the overarching governmental police organization, it's local police. And they represent their local warlord, they represent their local sub-tribe, and will actively steal from other sub-tribes within their greater tribal organization. Which leads us to into the future. They're looking at where the ethnic diversity lies across the state boundaries. There is a great possibility for a future civil war as unrest with a collaborationist government, the Taliban coming back from Pakistan, and other factors lead to the potential for a civil war. There's also been talk of a Federal Republic of Khorasan. As Professor Kia indicated, it's a historical region which has incorporated northern Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and kind of eastern Iran. There's been talk of creating a new republic which would help alleviate some security concerns. There's also been talk of creating a Pashtunistan, that's this flag right here, or a new Persian Empire. This is a map of what Pashtunistan would look like, and essentially it would be cutting both Afghanistan and Pakistan in half to create a new state solely for the Pashtuns. However, down in here are the Baluchis, which nobody really pays attention to. So in this great plan of we're going to create a Pashtunistan, a land for the Pashtuns, totally discounts the minority Baluchis and creates a state which supposedly will allow for security into the future. However, as we have seen, they can't even maintain security on a 400-meter bridge, so the possibility of them creating a secure state, exceedingly unlikely. Just want to finish with a few kind of images showing you what Afghanistan looks like. And while my time in Afghanistan might be done, all of these fractured political parties and legacies lead to issues moving into the future that will certainly affect them. And it's the children of Afghanistan that have been hit the hardest through these generations of war and this political uncertainty, which has created a state that can no longer sustain its own limited development. Cool. And I will now hand it over to Carson.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Carson Blake. I'll have to thank Artie and James for opening up for me and giving both great presentations. Now let's jump over to Iran. I'll start with the legacy of Iran behind me as you see a map of the old Persian Empire. The Persian culture has always held great historical figures such as Cyrus the Great, who created one of the first documented human rights documents. It's the Cyrus Cylinder. Also was a great, very powerful country. Women had maybe not full equal rights as we have today, but they are held more than they were in the Islamic State of Persia, or in what it would become to be. And a good example of that is the famed Immortal Legion of the old Persian army was actually led by a woman, and she was a high member of the Persian court. But let's jump up to the leaders we're going to get to, and that would be the first one of this guy, Reza Shah. We'll start back in the 1906 revolution. leading up to 1906 revolution was a corrupt and dynasty that was run by foreign influences and foreign concessions, the Qajar dynasty, who greatly sold out to British and Russia influence. This angered the people greatly. The Persian people wanted their country back, and they retaliated at first in 1906 in a peaceful revolution. It at first succeeded. They're able to gain a parliament. And from their parliament, they began to make change. But in 1907, the parliament was crushed by the Qajar dynasty. And so in 1908, another revolution followed, but this one was armed. And being an armed revolution, they succeeded again, and this time were able to enforce their rule, and the parliament stuck in the monarchy with the Qajar dynasty. And this would all lead up to and cause problems in the future, leading up to Reza Shah and also Khomeini after the Pahlavi dynasty. And this brings us to this man, Reza Shah Pahlavi. Born as Reza Khan, he was born in 1878 in Alasht village, north of Tehran in the mountains next to the Caspian Sea. At a young age, he would go to Tehran with his mother after the death of his father, where he'd be raised by his uncle and have a very strong military influence, because of which he soon would join in 1893 the Cossack Brigade, where this would get him into the military and lead up to his role as leadership. In a decade, he would move up to sergeant major and lead machine gun corps in the Cossacks. From there, he would slowly rise up to lieutenant, to captain, to major colonel, and all the way up to the top of general. He fought in many actions. He never fought in World War I or any major wars, but they were all local insurgents or uprisings throughout Iran. He was a great supporter of the revolution. He was very against the old dynasty and also the clergy, which at first he never really showed. And then in 1921, February 21st, Reza Khan surrounded the palace in Tehran, took it, and kicked out the Qajar dynasty. At first, he became the Minister of War, while his partner, Zahid Zi-al-Din, became the Prime Minister, and they kept the Shah as somewhat of a puppet, had no real power. Reza Shah from there in the next few years would get everyone to his side, sell people out, corrupt them, arrest them, pretty much use brutality and power and money to control. And then in 1923, he would get rid of oust Zahid from Prime Minister and take power, and this would be followed by controlling the parliament, buying them out and having them vote and completely set it up so he could become the Shah of Iran. In December 1925, he became the new leader and the new leader of the dynasty of Iran, the Pahlavi dynasty, which, funny story how he got the name, he liked the sound of it, so he bought it from a guy. From becoming Shah, he would change Iran greatly. On those rise to Shah, he used the clergy much to aid. He would go out, participate in religious things. He looked like he was on both sides. But in truth, once he came to power, that changed. He started modernizing greatly. First, with Reconstruction, needed to expand the roads, bring workers in, and all this. He brought in the railways. Then he jumped to expanding education. And this is where he really started to attack the clergy, because with education, apart from the military, he opened universities, and with the military also allowed women to sign up for the military and attend universities. And the biggest of all, unveil. He unveiled women in Iran, and this angered the clergy greatly. He would soon go as far to attack the clergy, where he would go to Qom, religious town in Iran, where he would march into the mosque, his boots on, grab a clergyman, drag him out, have him shaved and disrobed, and threatened him with the quote, "You speak against me again and I'll bring tanks. Your religion is against the modernization of Iran, the women of Iran, and if you go against it, I will destroy you." And at this point, all of the clergy and Islam was separated from Reza Shah and his dynasty. He would continue to make industry and expand industrially and modernize in Iran, basing a lot of it off the West. He began to send many students to school in the West, but unlike a lot of countries in the past who have sent students to the West to learn, he would not allow any student to learn the histories or philosophy or sociology or any of that, because he well knew if he did that, his youth will be coming back thinking and ready to oust him, while if he just sent them for engineering and all that, they would just know how to help him build. The first part of his reign, he was loved. He was seen as a great hero, but like any great leader, he would soon become corrupt. And in the 30s, he just became more and more of a dictator, more and more for money. Anyone who would go against him, he'd have them arrested, taken out, and against this. And this all led up to the the Second World War, where he would make his biggest mistake by voicing his approval and wanting to help aid Nazi Germany and Mussolini of the fascist Italian regime. With this statement, Russia, Britain, and America soon invaded Iran, ousting him from power and having his son, Mohammad Reza Shah, replace him. Mohammad Reza Shah would end up doing quite a few things for Iran, but in truth, he was always somewhat of a puppet for foreign powers. He never had true power like his father, could never fill his father's shoes. The original Reza Shah came from nothing and became a king and a ruler. His son lived off his father. He became the next ruler because he was there. Foreign powers needed a king, easier to deal with than a democracy, so they installed him. With Mohammad Reza Shah, at first he would start out great, but then another great man would come. This man, Mohammad Mossadegh. His only goal was to make Iran a true democracy, and his first big leap he ever did was attack Britain and fight them at their own game. He was the first one to ever full-out defeat Britain. In 1951, he ousted them from the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company and took back the Iranian oil for its country itself. This would lead to much strife with America and much fear by Muhammad. Fearing that he would lose rule and all this, he began to work with CIA and Kermit Roosevelt, who in 1953, Operation Ajax would become a thing where they would, using the underground and mafia, create demonstrations and outcries in Tehran, which would lead to a coup d'etat, which ousted him from power as prime minister in office and returned power to Mohammad Reza Shah. And from here, he would continue ruling. He would also bring the White Revolution, which was a revolution to nationalize Iran's forest, make land reforms, turn state-owned land to private-owned, and many other things. This had much outcry from the clergy. It was a very West-based system. He just wanted to industrialize even greater, and by doing so, he would bring in much more rural religious workers from outside of Tehran into the major cities, which would all lead up to the 1979 revolution. During the 70s, there was much in Iran. There was much hate and struggle. People were against the monarchy. People looked to the clergy. And since the 1906 and 1908 revolution, returning back to then, clergy was sort of put on the sidelines. 1906, they participated pretty heavily. But after the 1906 revolution filmed, it became an armed revolution. They completely kept the clergy out of all deals. They wanted to be a full-out secular government, full-out secular constitution, which this led to many Islamists joining the soon-to-be revolution that would rise in 78, 79. Starting in 1977, mass demonstrations began against the Shah. Most of these, they were civil resistance campaigns led by left-wing secular student groups, intellectual thinkers, and the clergy. The clergy started getting involved from the outside. They never stepped in much. They just gave support, said, "We were there to you, got your back." And the big man to do this was Ruhollah Khomeini, who was, and during the White Revolution in 1963, was exiled from Iran and spent most of his time in Iraq and Turkey, but always still writing in the background, giving his voice and support for the next big push and to take out the Shah. So eventually the Shah would leave Iran in January 1979. That would be shortly followed by Khomeini's return. And then after Khomeini's return, the palace would be sacked by guerrillas, taken out, and the revolution would come to an end. Both sides struggled greatly. Both sides struggled. But the two that struggled the most were the monarchy and the military, and on the other side, the left-wing intellectual thinkers, student groups. The whole time, the clergy just sat there and gave support. And now was their time to react. Oh, not react, act. Ruhollah Khomeini jumped forward and took complete power. He became the supreme leader after the revolution in 1979, during which he would completely reverse almost everything Reza Shah set. Reforms, completely brought back the veil, kicked women out of the military, even tried to do it at the university, but it was too far set. Women going to universities, he couldn't have that much control. But a lot of just control was reset. The regime took power, and it was the supreme leader, Khomeini, who made all the calls, made all the shots. And he got to that power by just staying on the sidelines and waiting. He also completely cut off any connection with foreign trade, especially the USA. He saw us as the Satan of the world, the true monster. He would not have any dealing with us. And following the revolution, there was a hostage crisis in 1980. Khomeini was a huge supporter of this, especially for the fact with his new Islamic constitution, the voting for that was during the hostage crisis. And if he supported that and got all of Iran behind it, it was so much easier for him to bring in his new constitution, which completely changed the constitution that was set in 1906. Khomeini would also deal with the big Iran-Iraq war, where he would have many small Islamic groups come up and join and fight. He still used underground aid from foreign countries to fight this war, even though he said it was all them. Used old stockpiles of American weaponry the Shah had. He continued to fight. He only would last a decade, though. In 1989, he would die of he actually had, I think, a total of 10 heart attacks in over a few days, and also had intestinal cancer. Nothing was really go for him, and soon he would pass. Following him came Ali Khamenei, who, quite a bit like Mohammad Reza Shah, was sort of just there and placed into power. He became the new supreme leader, and even though he had his own reforms and changed things, he never had the power that Khomeini did. He was just like Mohammad Reza Shah compared to his father, the lesser of the two leaders. Khomeini followed his predecessor in many things. By one of the big things Khomeini followed in was playing groups and parties against each other, so no political party or group in Iran could rise up and gain power to fight the regime. By having them fight at their own throats, they were always divided and could never truly unite. And this is one thing the Islamic regime has always used and have been great at controlling. And this coming up today, I'm terrible at using PowerPoint. I never use slides. This brings us to the 2009 Green Movement. This all started in the protest and the demand of the removal of Muhammad Ahmadinejad, who he ran the presidential elections in 2009, which were obviously set. The youth that at this time and today consists of 70% of the Iranian population rose up and against this. Many demonstrations broke out. There was police brutality, people were hurt, but nothing bad until a woman named Netta, who was shot in the heart during a demonstration and died instantly. From Netta, the Green Movement moved much forward and affected the regime today. The problem with the regime, and this was 6 years ago, but it still scared the regime. They saw that what they have is just on very thin ice, and they have to be very careful, especially with how much the world, no matter what of religion, is still modernizing. There's still the danger of failing, and so they have to deal with this youth, this major youth they have in Iran. They have to deal with all these changes, and if they take the wrong step, the regime can plummet. They still have control with power and fear and a great military, but it is iffy for them. And that is the leadership of Iran. It started way in the past in ancient Iran, but in modern leadership of Iran, starting with Reza Shah, a man who came from nothing, changed something, but in the end still failed because power corrupted him and became too big for his own shoes. His son would come, who was in the end just a puppet for foreign powers, could never stand up to his father. And all in all, the leadership failed again and led to the Islamic regime, which is still going today. But how much longer will this leadership of quieting your citizens, not letting them do what they want, have the control that they do, how long will it last? And that's where I leave you. Thanks.
Thank you, Carson. I'd like to take time and thank each and every one of our presenters for their hard work and all the information they brought to us today. Please join me in giving them a big hand. And now we have some time to take some questions from all of you. Please do ask our presenters questions, and I'm sure they will all be happy to answer to the best of their ability. And kindly, when you come up to ask a question, tell us if it is specifically for one of the presenters or if it's a question for the entire panel. And now I would like to open the floor for the first question.
Thank you. Question for the gentleman that just made the last presentation. You spoke about the huge disponderance of the population group, so many young people versus so few older people. Did I understand that correctly? Yeah. Why is that?
A lot of it is because of such things as the White Revolution, to bring in world workers from the South and to have, bring them into Tehran from to cities to work. One way to boom this even faster than just having workers come is health clinics and baby boom and wanting to produce more of the population. And an off-product of the White Revolution was a mass expansion of population growth in Iran. And that is one reason that led to this giant leap of that, especially now that there's 70% of the population is under the age of 30. And it's all because of what led up to the revolution and pretty much the industrialization of Iran. Same as with anything in really history, to industrialize you need population growth. And the best way to do that, other than bringing in people from rural areas, is faster production rates. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And now we need a female to ask a question. I'm trying to maintain balance.
This question is also for the last speaker. You left us with an intriguing question. How much longer can the current regime hold on? But with the Green Movement revolution in 2009, as you stated, it frightened the regime, and when the West did not respond to the pleas from the protesters to come help, the regime cracked down pretty stridently. What sort of resistance is ongoing now within particularly the younger population in Iran today? Do we know?
It's a lot like what it has been in the past. The youth has always been for modernizing, to adapt, to change. Like, much of the youth in Iran would probably keep the regime and allow it to keep ruling as if it modernized more and became more, not based off the West, because that's nothing what they do at all, but more accepting of change. That's the thing with Iranians, is if you look at a lot of their revolutions, they're never very too violent. And even in 2009, besides Neda being killed herself, there was no violence from the youth itself retaliating to that. And it's still mostly just peaceful demonstrations. And who knows what will happen, especially once June comes up with all the negotiations with nuclear arms and all that. Who knows how that will change the regime's control and how that will change the feeling of the people of Iran. Does that answer your question? Or yeah?
Thank you, Chris. Next. That's speaking English with a Palestinian dialect. Next, please.
Thank you. I have two questions. One's for James, and that is about the prospect of a stable sovereign state anywhere in and around what we know as Afghanistan. And is the model of the sovereign state just not very well suited to the realities of ethno-linguistic tribalism, throughout the area? And then just a basic question for the Professor Artie. At what point did Persia, Iran, become Islamic? And what brought that about? I guess that must have been a long, long time ago.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may answer that first. I do think that the inherent nature of the state of Afghanistan, because it was created not to serve as a unified state, but rather as a buffer zone between the Russians and the British, who didn't want the Russians in India, there weren't any considerations taken to which groups, how much of which groups, and where the groups were being confined. So there really hasn't been a lasting legacy of inter-ethnic group collaboration. And that lack of history or desire, really, to put aside old differences, as differences in the region run for a very, very long time, there really hasn't been the desire to put those aside, and that has resulted in both the inability to create an effective, cohesive state and a really desire to. While there are certain politicians who are looking to create a larger Afghan identity, create a state moving into the future, Ashraf Ghani and his brother Hashmat Ghani, as well as a man named Abdullah Abdullah, were all looking to create a unified Afghan state. However, it's one thing for the people in Kabul to say, oh, this is the government, and we're going to put out a constitution, these are going to be the laws, and this is how we're going to do it. It's very different to get the family who still lives in a mud hut outside of Kandahar. They don't have any electricity, they don't have a car. It's very difficult to reach them. And so there is a persistence, especially in the more rural regions, to maintain allegiance solely to sub-tribal or regional power broker ties, as opposed to foregoing those allegiances in favor of greater alliance to a state concept, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and thank you for your question. Primarily, when you ask the question, Iran, we have to question which Iran we are talking about, because the idea of nation-state primarily is a second half of 19th century phenomena, that it's a Germanic, Italian idea. Primarily Bismarck thought that the world can be divided in various nation-states, although ironically, when we are talking about Central Asia, Middle East, they are all multinational, multi-ethnic states. So there's states that we are looking at, like 1938, this country that we know it as Iran officially came into existence. So in that sense, we are talking about almost every single country that you see in Central Asia or Middle East is all fabricated, is non-real. It's not real at all. Like when we are talking about all the Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, like Uzbekistan, and others. Primarily, like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan came into existence in 1924, Tajikistan 1929, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan 1936. You don't find any of these names in any history book or cultural books. Iran, known as Persia primarily prior to 1938, included the whole area actually included 4 major powerhouses through like medieval time into like modern times. So they had to be broken down, divide and rule. That was the collaboration between the Russians to the north, British to the south, and primarily that collaboration somehow resulted into coming into existence these entities that fabricated into. And when you have 20-some different states that you have fabricated, you have to fabricate history for them. So we are talking about a lot of phoniness, actually, as far as the history of this nationality or ethnicity. We are talking about, like Uzbekistan, 120 different nationality, ethnicities. But as far as Islam coming to the area, primarily we are talking about 651, Sassanid Empire was defeated by the Islamic army. 751, Tang Dynasty of China was defeated by Islamic army, almost 100 years apart. But meanwhile, Islam penetrated into the flatlands of Middle East, Central Asia. But although many of the religions and cults within the area, when we are talking about Zoroastrianism, when we are talking about like Manichaeism, when we are talking about like Mithraism, when we are talking about Zurvanism, although some of them somehow evaporated, but what is somehow were diminished and gone. But many of the other religions, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and others somehow in various pockets within the area survived. So depends which Islam we are talking about, depends which entity we are talking about. Mostly flatlands were exposed to the Islamic ideas and concepts, although when we are talking about, a good example of it, that when we are talking about mass migration of Buddhists to heights of lower Central Asia, southern part of Central Asia, when we are talking about creation of Tibetan kingdom in 7th century, or Nepal for that matter, that the increased number of population, somehow they flee all the turbulences within the flatlands into the heights. Yeah, I'm going to stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. More questions, please. And now we need a student. Although we are all students and we are all teachers, I tell all my students, we are all students and we are all teachers.
Okay. I guess this could be for anybody who has an answer, but why have the power struggles in Iran really not had the violence of other regions in the Middle East or Central East Asia or West Asia?
Thank you. Very good question. Who would like to start?
I can.
Chris, please.
I'd say it's a big part of it is just the Iranian people themselves, is to have, because they're not so separated as other countries in the world. They all see themselves as an Iranian Persian identity, and they all strive to be, what's the word I want here? Not exactly peaceful, but to be accepting and to get along with everything. And it's easier, I think the Iranians themselves understand it's easier to get things done and have it last if it's through nonviolence than if you do it through violence. Like, yes, in the past, like in 1906, that constitutional revolution did fail because it was unarmed, and it won again when it became armed. But that came as a last choice. It wasn't their first choice, which in a way they still succeeded. In 1906, the only thing that changed that was once the dynasty got the chance to take them out with the Cossack Brigade, they did. And so they responded to violence that way. So like my answer will have to be a lot of it is just the Iranian people themselves is they try to avoid violence. Like even when in 1941 when Reza Shah was ousted from power, like none of his troops really fought the invading Russian or British forces. They came in, realized they were surrounded, and accepted it. And there wasn't besides the taking of the palace in the 1979 revolution, there wasn't too much fighting or major violence there. It exists, but not as it does in other places. Would you like
Excellent.
to continue on that at all?
My question is for James. With so many different ethnic linguistic groups in Afghanistan, is there a possibility for an Afghani nationalism to emerge? And how does this affect people who are working on the ground, like often with the military? How does it affect like daily interactions when you don't know who you're dealing with specifically?
The answer to the first half of that is, it's hard to say. I personally think that there would have to be some sort of unifying cataclysmic event, which would, sort of like the rise of the Taliban in 94 to 96, to push people to unify together. But as it stands right now, there's really not the upside to each of the particular groups coming together. There's really not that sense of benefit that is driving them to do that. The second part, as far as how it impacts on the ground NGO military relations, it's hard. What it's, and a lot of people really don't talk about this. What it's come down to is, for the NGO side, it's, we're going to give money to this group, or we're going to give money to that group, and then this other group comes and tries to take the first group's money or undercut their bids. And it happens even within tribes. So one element of Pashtuns will try to take school contracts from another group of Pashtuns because there really isn't that overarching sense of unity. For like military-driven development projects like schools or roads or bridges, what they certainly don't talk about is, it's changed. It's now 6 to 9 month rotations, but it used to be 12-month rotation where a unit would go to a region, do their development projects, and then get replaced by another unit. And what would happen is, say, Unit A would be there first and start projects 1, 2, and 3. And then Unit B would replace them a year later, decide that projects 1, 2, and 3 didn't make any sense, and we don't like where this is going, so we're going to start projects 4, 5, and 6. Totally discontinue what had happened, and then Unit C comes in as, well, both these other 2 units were wrong. And so now we're going to do projects 7, 8, and 9. So now you have 3 years, 9 different projects, none of them are complete, all of them are getting paid for, and so it's really created a situation in which money is being paid with not a lot of appreciable return. I guess if that answers your question.
We have a question up here.
So thank you very much. Excellent presentations, and really enjoyed listening to all of you. A couple of comments just, and then I have a question. First of all, this great question from Stephen, and welcome from Helena. Thank you for being with us. The whole issue of nation state and, Persia, Iran, and so on and so forth, I think one way to approach it is to say that identity was basically linguistic and cultural rather than based on nation state, right? When we are talking about Greater Iran, as it was known, or Greater Persia, it extended from Western China into Central Asia, into Afghanistan, into Iran. There were no Iran, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, so on and so forth. They were part of this Greater Persian or Iranian cultural world, which was defined by language, culture, history, so on and so forth, but not defined as a nation state. As Dr. Kia mentioned, nation state is a very modern concept post-French Revolution, and especially with a lot of German influence. And the creation of a nation state is a Western concept itself. And that's why the region is suffering so much, because the region did not want to be divided into nation states, but the British did, and the French did, and the Russians did. And the result was the mess that it's created today. And that's, I think, one of the contradictions. And the question is an excellent question, because it brings the reality which was on the ground and what was created as a result of Western colonial interference in the region. That's just one sort of thing. And then the other comment on question about violence or non-violence in Iranian political culture, I think one simple answer is the very high level of education in Iran and among the political leadership, and especially today among the youth, and knowing, as Carson alluded to, that every time you have a violent revolution, you always bring the worst people to the top. And it is only through peaceful change, through reforms, that you can bring the nonviolent sort of leadership and empower them to change their society. Although Iranians would always tell you that violence has always been imported into Iran. Carson alluded to 1953 CIA coup against the democratically elected government in Iran. That wasn't Iranian violence. That was oil companies' violence. And this is what how the Iranians would respond to it. But my question to all of you, and perhaps starting with James, is that going back to this issue of fractional, right, entities, for example, in Afghanistan, and especially in the case of Afghanistan, how can we actually justify continuing supporting the Afghan regime when at the end of the line we know that the Afghan regime is unable to really bring together Afghanistan as a nation state? Because Afghanistan is not a nation state, and your presentation clearly shows that. So, according to you, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, do you think that this is a total waste of money and military spending being so high and so on and so forth? Or do you think Afghanistan has ever a chance of becoming a nation state with all these different ethnic, linguistic, and cultural groups contained in it? Thank you very much.
Wow. So I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first part is kind of piggybacking off what Professor Kia said about the literacy rates. In Afghanistan, men's literacy rates is less than 50%, it's around 46%, and women's literacy rates is less than 20%. So it's very hard to drive development in a culture that almost certainly less than half the population can read. The answer to the specific question of are we wasting our time and money, it's a tough one. I think that asking my personal opinion, the contributing to the goal of the current administration's global picture for Afghanistan is probably not as tenable as it could be. As far as helping to create schools, helping to create bridges and infrastructure in regions which had never seen electricity, less than a third of the country has active grid power. So the continual urban development projects, I think, are highly, highly worth it. The Ashraf Ghani is an economist. His kind of view for the development of Afghanistan is very, very technical and involves like foreign direct investment and all these different facets, which both Abdullah and his brother Hashmat Ghani question as being sort of above the, I don't want to denigrate Afghans, but they say it's above the comprehensive level of the Afghans. So because they can't read, it can't reasonably be expected for them to understand the concepts that are coming out of Kabul. So if we were to sort of step back and refocus our development efforts to a more, I don't want to say simplistic, but a less technical solution for development, I think there might be more appreciable gains. Because the way it's going right now, we're going to be there however long we're going to be there, and overwhelming possibility that we're going to pull out. The Pashtuns that we saw are cut in half and they're just hanging out in Pakistan, in the FATA or Waziristan and areas like that. They're going to come back, there's going to be a civil war, and they're going to be exactly where they were in 1992. And trillions of our dollars, trillions of other nations' dollars are going to be for nothing. So that was my qualified answer of yes but no.
Thanks, James. I I have a couple comments actually on complementary. They were excellent presentation. I'm very thankful for, we have excellent students in CSWA. A couple of things. First and foremost, I think that part of the problem is also the colonial powers primarily had no idea about the history and culture of the area. Just an example, when we are talking about, complementary to what was said here, when we are talking about, I make an example to make a point actually, when we were talking about Kyrgyzstan, we are talking about 40 different clans or tribes. When we are talking about Turkmenistan, we are talking about 28 different clans and tribes. Like many of these, when we are talking about a clan or tribe, we are talking about local kingdoms. We are talking about the autonomy within that tribe. A tribe is a large family, and it makes that organic structure, that organic relationship between members of the tribes, the way that the tribe members actually follow the leadership or whatever the leader said, is totally disregarded by these colonial forces when they move to the area. So on the one hand, if something is going to be implemented in a traditional type of way, if it is perceived, if it's like planned, that somehow to show respect or understanding for the traditional formation, so each clan or tribe, especially some of these areas are very clannish, very tribal, although people don't like to claim that, but then that's the reality of many of these places. Unless that respect or understanding for that tradition is considered, and each tribe, each local king is received the way that has been received or respected through the time, through the history. That is one way of dealing with this. Otherwise, if we really want to modernize, we have to implement a civil society, that all members of the community are regardless of sex, race, gender, nationality, ethnicity, religion, cult, background, they have to be considered equally. I mean, the way that's, the problem that we are saying that complementary, you know, the question, and James answered it very nicely. The way that when we are talking about one-sided, when we are talking about an alliance, when that alliance does not consider, does not include in many parties involved within that coalition or that type of like composition, the problem comes then. When we don't have like enough political and social, cultural institutions, and we do not consider all people involved within that coalition, that we call it the nation state. That nation state is going to be limping all the way. It's not going to be working out. Sorry. Thanks.
Thank you, Ardi. With this, we come to the conclusion of this panel. I would like to sincerely thank you all for being with us and encourage you to look into attending other panels. Thank you very much.